Rugby's disciplinary process puts the player first, protecting the welfare of players and promoting fair play. The disciplinary process is standardized and is applied all around the world and at all levels of the game to ensure that acts of foul play are dealt with fairly. So how does it work? An act of foul play is a dangerous act that is intentional or reckless. Intentional means the player acted deliberately. Reckless means that the player knew or should have known that there was a risk of committing an act of foul play but carried on anyway. If an act was accidental, then there is no foul play. When an act of foul play occurs during a match, the referee must award a penalty, a yellow card or a red card. If the referee awards a yellow card, the player must leave the pitch. In 15s for 10 minutes, in 7s for 2 minutes, before being allowed to return. If the referee awards a red card, the player must leave the pitch immediately and cannot be replaced by another player. A player is cited by a citing commissioner after a match ends for an act of foul play where a red card should have been issued on the field of play but was not. This might happen where the referee did not see the act of foul play or issued an insufficient sanction for the act of foul play. If a player is cited or receives a red card, the player must attend a disciplinary hearing. A disciplinary hearing is chaired by a judicial officer who is an experienced lawyer with significant rugby knowledge. Sometimes, at international level, a judicial committee hears cases when the judicial officer is joined by 2 panel members who are former players, coaches, or referees. There are 4 steps in the disciplinary hearing process. The first step is the red card test. The judicial committee first asks if the player accepts or denies that there was an act of foul play and that it deserved a red card. If the player accepts, then the first stage of the hearing is over and the committee will move on to deciding the appropriate sanction. If the player denies, the committee reviews the match footage and other evidence like statements from other players, reports from the match officials, medical reports relating to any injury, and so on. The committee reviews all the evidence and listens to the player and then makes a decision. If the committee decides that the action did not deserve a red card, the hearing ends and the player is not sanctioned and is free to play again. If the committee decides that the act of foul play deserved a red card, we move on to the second stage of the hearing, which is deciding on the appropriate sanction. At the second stage, the judicial committee chooses the correct starting point for the player's sanction. The sanction is the number of weeks for which the player is suspended and cannot play in matches. Every act of foul play has a specified sanction. The sanction table is updated regularly with input from international players, coaches, and referees. Each sanction has 3 different starting points: low end, mid-range, or top end. Here is an example where a player has made a dangerous high tackle. To decide on the correct starting point, the committee has to take a number of things into account. In this case, the committee decides that it was a reckless act where there was a minor injury to the opposing player and contact was made with the opponent player's head. Because the player made contact with the opponent's head, when the committee looks at the sanction table, they are obliged to impose at least a mid-range sanction. This was introduced by World Rugby to deter high tackles and reduce the risk of head injuries. The outcome for the player here is a starting point sanction of 6 weeks. The third step in the process is where committee decides whether there are any reasons to increase the sanction. If any of these factors are present, the committee might decide to increase the sanction, usually by 1 or 2 weeks. Next, the committee considers whether there are any reasons to decrease the sanction. If any of these factors are present, the committee might decide to reduce the sanction. The maximum reduction possible is 50% from the starting point. Taking a look back at the example of the dangerous tackle that we saw earlier, the committee decided on a mid-range starting sanction of 6 weeks. In this case, there were no reasons to increase the sanction. Then the committee looked at reasons to reduce the sanction and saw that the player had a clean disciplinary record, but he did not admit the offence, nor did he apologise or show any remorse. Because of that, the committee decided to deduct only 1 week from the starting sanction. A different player who received a red card for a similar offence might receive a greater reduction of 3 weeks if she admitted the act of foul play, apologised immediately, and had a clean disciplinary record. This explains why players who commit acts of foul play that appear to be similar sometimes end up with different sanctions. The final step for the committee is working out the total sanction for the player. In our high tackle example, the player began with a mid-range starting point of 6 weeks. No additional weeks were added because none of the relevant factors were present. The committee decided that very few mitigating factors were present, and so only 1 week of a possible 3 was deducted. This gives a final sanction of 5 weeks. Players are free to appeal any decision, and the appeal is heard by an independent appeal committee or appeal officer. Here's a reminder of how the process works from start to finish. The player receives a red card or is cited for an act of foul play and is provisionally suspended from all rugby. The player attends a disciplinary hearing where there are 4 steps. The player accepts or denies committing an act of foul play and that it deserved a red card. The committee assesses the seriousness of the foul play and chooses the correct entry point from the sanction table. The committee decides whether there are any factors that increase or decrease the sanction. The committee decides on the total sanction, and the player cannot play any rugby match during the suspension period. Through a standardised process applied all around the world, World Rugby's disciplinary process protects the safety and welfare of rugby players and ensures acts of foul play are dealt with fairly.